Israel, Pakistan's ideological rival. 4. Sunday, September 6, 2020. David Ben-Gurion inherited Zionism, and his father, Avigdor, belonged to the group that wrote the Protocols of the World Zionist Movement. In 1906, David Ben-Gurion moved to Jaffa, where he settled when hatred had started against the Jews in Russia. During this time, he kept on militarily organizing the Jews settled there until the establishment of Israel. He was the one who signed the document declaring the establishment of Israel on May 14, 1948, and was unanimously elected as the Prime Minister of Israel. In the Arab-Israeli War, which took place immediately after the establishment of the State of Israel, he surprised the people when armed men began to emerge from every Jewish home, whom he had trained. He was the sole undisputed leader of the Israeli state and the Zionist movement until his death, and his policies continue to guide the State of Israel. On May 14, 1948, the same man, David Ben-Gurion, as soon as he became the Prime Minister, sent a telegram to Quaid-e-Azam, Governor-General of Pakistan, to begin diplomatic relations. Quaid-e-Azam, who had already called Israel the illegitimate offspring of Europe, not only did not respond, but in the Arab-Israeli War, which began with the establishment of Israel, Pakistan bought 250,000 guns from Czechoslovakia and supplied the fighting Arabs, and also bought 4 military planes from Italy and supplied them to Egypt. Based on this information from the American archives, Moshe Yager wrote this detail in his article. This was a time when Pakistan's economic situation was deteriorating, but still Quaid-e-Azam provided full support to the Arabs fighting against Israel. In the Second Arab-Israeli War, which took place in 1967, Pakistan sent 6 of its fighter pilots to fight Israel, one of whom, Pakistani pilot Saif al-Azam, had the honor of shooting down 4 Israeli planes. In the 1973 war, Pakistan fully supported the Palestinians. In this war, Egypt had won a surprising victory and the world's strongest Israeli defense line Bar-Elav was reduced to dust. Afterwards, in 1982, when Israel entered Lebanon, innumerable Pakistanis went to fight it, of which 50 Pakistanis were arrested by Israel. The last war with Israel was between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006, in which only 70 Hezbollah members were martyred. But Hezbollah's attacks proved Israel's strongest air defense system home to sand, the defense system for which the American Pentagon was also wishing. 4 Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, were evacuated out of fear, and the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert acknowledged the defeat in the parliament. Writers from around the world, including some of Pakistan's mountains of ignorance, I don't know at whose behest they present Israel with overwhelming weightage. Of the 4 wars so far, Israel has won only one in 1967. The first war took place in 1948, Jordan had freed the British-occupied West Bank within days. In the third war, Egypt crushed the pride of the Israeli defense line and withdrew its territory, and in the fourth war, Israel suffered its worst defeat from Hezbollah. A country that is large enough to cut off from the rest of the world when 10 small ships are docked on its shores. It has no airspace of its own but uses Turkish airspace for exercises. Where the saying goes that if a few Arabs come out in the bazaars with guns, the whole city enters the basements of their homes. This country is established, maintained and alive only by the hypocrisy of the Arab countries, and it only beats in the hearts of these so-called intellectuals. The secret initiative to increase the pennies of friendship with Pakistan and Israel was initiated by Qadiani Foreign Minister Sir Zafarullah. This is revealed in a note dated January 16, 1953, written by G. Raphael, Director General of the State Department in the American Archives, stating that on January 14, 1953, Sir Zafarullah and the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Abba Eban, met. In the meeting, Zafarullah said that the Pakistani government has no hatred for Israel and considers it an important part of the Middle East, but the government is very afraid of the religious groups. He also promised future contacts and exchange of delegations between Israel and Pakistan. It was at this time that the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Khawaja Nazimuddin, during a meeting with a delegation of Arab scholars, declared Israel a plague, and then the next Prime Minister, Muhammad Ali Bagra, delivered a speech against Israel at the Asian Conference in Colombo. Zafarullah was making the same statement in front of Pakistanis, but inside was the same world of hypocrisy as today's secular, liberal intellectuals and fame-crazy writers whose method is to leave no stone unturned and be abused without any argument so that the rating is better. After Qadiani Foreign Minister Zafarullah, in 1998 on a government level Nawaz Sharif, ex-Prime Minister, contacted, when he wrote the secret letter to the Israeli Prime Minister that we would not provide nuclear capability to Iran. Much progress was made under Musharraf's tenure, and a meeting between the foreign ministers of the two countries also took place. But at the same time, Israel emerged as India's best friend. Speaking in the U.S. Senate on April 12, 1981, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin called on the United States to ask Arab states to suspend Pakistan's nuclear program. It is now clear to the world that Israeli fighter jets had twice arrived in Qahuda in 1980 and 1988 to carry out an attack similar to Iraq's Operation Opera. The two attacks and the Indo-Israeli plans are described in detail in the book by two British authors, Arden Levy and Catherine Clark. According to the authors, Israeli planes were ready to fly every time, but the top Indian officials rejected the plan, saying that nothing wrong will happen with Israel, but after that we will jump into the war with Pakistan. Politically, religiously, morally and regionally, it is a short history to this day. Israel is a country dependent upon American aid. Since 1985, the United States has been granting $3 billion in annual aid and $8 billion in other benefits. So far, the United States has provided $142.3 billion in cash assistance to Israel. Israel, whose defensive barrage line was destroyed by Anwar al-Sadat's army in 1973, and whose air defense system was destroyed by Hezbollah in 2006, is not only a friend of India, the biggest enemy of Pakistan, but also an equal partner in opposition of Pakistan. My country's coward and materialistic intellectuals constantly scare and frighten us with such Israel. These intellectuals of my country who were following the footsteps of Qadiani Foreign Minister Sir Zafarullah and flourished under Pervez Musharraf, write today in favor of recognizing Israel, but cannot lose a single benefit. We are told that countries should decide based on their economic interests. My only question to those gentlemen is that whether they make all the decisions of their house only considering worldly, economic and material gain. Do they trade religion, honor, family and dignity to bring wealth, peace and tranquility to their home? If you wear the turban of honor on your head in the decisions of your home and take care of the breadth of family support, then the Pakistani nation is left to humiliate and disgrace before Allah, His Messenger and national support whom is given such dishonorable advice. The end.